So individualism versus progressivism in the 1920s and 1930s has been the theme of much of Module 9. We have an individualism of Herbert Hoover that sells well in the 1920s. We have a progressivism of FDR that sells better to the American people in the 1930s. One of the things I hope that you've seen in going through all of these readings is how they're tied together. 2 or 3 modules ago, you read someone named Herbert Crowley, and that individual, that thinker, I called the father of American progressivism. And here at the beginning of the 20th century, 1909 to be exact, was giving an overview of what he believed would actually fulfill the mission of American life. And remember, he said the following, that we believe as Americans that if we follow the precept, equal rights for all and special privileges for none, that we've lived up to our notion of justice. That the American system of government, if it secures an equal and fair and exact administration of justice, has done its job. But the progressive argues that cannot possibly be the case because if democracy is to be fulfilled, equality must be realized. And if you're looking at American life at the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, you see large disparities between people who have an incredible amount of wealth, who live in these amazing mansions, and then others who live in tenement housing who don't have the same economic goods. So what Crowley argues is that really in the 20th century, we have to kind of revive our notion of who we are, revive our notion of democracy, and like a good pragmatist, make the thing true by making it real. Remember, the pragmatist says that things are only true in this world if they make a concrete difference. Democracy is only true if it makes a concrete difference. So Crowley says, let's change things. Let's make things better. Let's make things more equal. And this call that he gives in 1909 is received and said in different ways by a variety of different American progressive intellectuals. Perhaps the most powerful of these intellectuals is a man named John Dewey, who really is the father of the American educational system. So if you grew up in a K through 12 public setting, most of the norms that defined your educational experience had been encouraged by him over 100 years ago in his writings and his trainings of the teachers who then would go on to teach all of the K through 12 public educators in our system. So Dewey writes this piece, Liberalism and Social Action. And what are we to take from this piece that builds upon Crowley and that gives us a clearer notion of what progressives are trying to attempt? Well, at the heart of this essay is the following line from Dewey. That throughout most of history, human beings have suffered from scarcity. But in the 17th, 18th, and 19th century American experience, what we were able to do as Americans living on the North American continent and working within it is we were by and large able to overcome the problem of scarcity. You think of all the patents, you think of all the different ways of farming, you think of all the improvements that take place as you move from one revolution to the next, an agricultural and transportation and industrial revolution. And Dewey says, by and large, Americans have done the best job out of anyone in conquering nature and being able to provide the goods that come from the conquest of nature. So in many ways, he'll say, we have fulfilled the first of 2 jobs that were given to us by the modern political philosopher Francis Bacon. We have conquered nature. But what is our problem? We've conquered nature and we stop there. And we say, okay, we're able to produce as many goods as possible, but we've not attempted the second part of Bacon's ambition for mankind. Bacon wanted to conquer nature, but he also wanted human beings to conquer human nature, to conquer human division, to conquer the injustice that exists between one human being and another, to conquer faction, to conquer evil, to conquer sin. Dewey believes that it's within our power as human beings to overcome those aspects of our character that denigrate another. But what we have to do is we have to educate the individual to be liberated from their greed, to be liberated from their selfishness, and to think of themselves more along the lines of an organic being connected with others than an individual being simply out for one's own welfare. The program of liberalism and social action is a program of education in which all Americans would be re-educated, not to view themselves as individuals, but to view themselves as part of a social whole. And if we can get Americans to buy into that picture of them being part of a social whole, then all of the things that divide us will go by the wayside. How do we do this? We practice science. We encourage human beings through the practice of science to realize that they ought not to have differences with one another, that they ought to come together, and through central planning and working together, they ought to be able to tend to the needs of all people within society. This will be a scientific project, this will be an educational project, and this will be a project that will require the instrument of the administrative state to communicate like FDR does to the American people to buy into this program. So, not preservation of the past, not preservation of some golden age, some Arcadia that existed before, but the creation of a new age in which we come together completely under the banner of liberalism. Only that type of liberalism, Dewey argues, will be one that fully realizes its potential.